What if the hardest part of surviving The Walking Dead isn't the walkers? Season 3, Episode 12, Clear, shows us Morgan alone in his fortified apartment, and he's done everything right tactically. He's armed, barricaded, supplied, and alive. But he's also completely broken. The walls are covered in writing. His apartment's full of traps, and he's collected evidence of every building he's cleared. He survived alone longer than almost anyone, but the cost was everything. His son, his sanity, his ability to connect. And that's what we're exploring tonight. What does survival actually require? And is staying alive worth losing who you are? Let's look at the patterns that work, the choices that kill, and the impossible balance between breathing and living. Because Morgan proves something. You can survive perfectly and still lose everything that matters. Settle in. Let's trace the keys to survival together and figure out which ones are worth keeping. The first rule of surviving The Walking Dead is simple, and Rick Grimes learned it in the first episode. Know when to run. In Season 1, Episode 1, Days Gone By, Rick rides into Atlanta on horseback, alone, looking for survivors, and within minutes, he's surrounded by hundreds of walkers. His horse is torn apart, and he's scrambling into a tank to avoid being eaten alive. It's one of the most iconic scenes in the series. But it's also a perfect lesson in what not to do. Rick survived because he retreated, because he found shelter, because Morgan's voice came over the tank's radio and gave him hope and direction. But the lesson isn't that Rick was brave. The lesson is that bravery without an exit strategy is just another word for suicide. Let's look at the pattern. The survivors who live long-term in The Walking Dead are the ones who know when to retreat. Daryl, Carol, Maggie. They've all survived because they're willing to run when the situation's impossible. Back in Season 2, when Herschel's farm was overrun, the group scattered. They didn't stand and fight a horde of hundreds. They got in vehicles and fled, regrouping later. In Season 4, when the prison fell to the governor's attack, Rick didn't rally the troops for a last stand. He grabbed Carl and ran. And that willingness to abandon a position, to prioritize survival over defending territory, it's what separates long-term survivors from corpses. The counterexample is everywhere. The people of Atlanta didn't run. They stayed in the city, tried to defend their homes, their neighborhoods, and they died. The walkers Rick encountered in that first episode, the ones swarming his horse, they were Atlanta's residents. People who thought they could hold their ground, who thought the military or the government would save them, who waited too long to leave. And Rick, stumbling through those streets, he's walking through the consequences of staying. The theory here is that courage without strategy is fatal. Shane survived because he got Laurie and Carl out of the city early. Rick's crew at the quarry survived because they were already outside Atlanta when it fell. But the people who stayed, who believed in safety zones and government promises, they became the horde. Here's the emotional weight. Running feels like cowardice. Rick's a sheriff, trained to protect, to stand his ground, to confront threats. And riding into Atlanta, even alone, even unarmed except for a pistol, it feels heroic. It feels like what a leader should do. But the apocalypse doesn't reward heroics. It rewards pragmatism. And Rick, trapped in that tank, hearing Morgan's voice say, "Hey you, dumbass." Yeah, you in the tank. He's being taught the first and most important lesson. If you can't win, run. If you can't fight, hide. If you can't save everyone, save yourself. And that lesson, that willingness to retreat, is what keeps Rick alive long enough to become a leader. Because dead heroes don't lead, they just rot. And the survivors, the ones still standing after 11 seasons, they're the ones who ran when running was the smart choice, even when it felt like giving up. The second rule is harder, quieter, and it's written in Carol Pelletier's transformation across 11 seasons. If you have to kill, kill silently. In season 1, Carol's barely visible. She's an abused wife, quiet and scared. And when her daughter Sophia goes missing in season 2, Carol's paralyzed by grief and helplessness. But by season 4, something's changed. In the premiere, 30 Days Without an Accident, Carol's teaching children how to use knives, telling them, you fight, you don't give up. And by season 5, when Terminus has Rick's group captive, it's Carol who saves them. Alone, covered in walker blood, using stealth and fire, she destroys Terminus from the outside, while making almost no noise. And that pattern, that evolution from victim to silent killer, it's what keeps Carol alive when louder, stronger characters die around her. Let's trace the evidence. Carol's kills in Terminus. She uses explosions, yes, but she sets them strategically, from a distance, and she moves through the compound like a ghost. In season 7, when she's living alone in that house outside the kingdom, she kills saviors who come looking for her, and she does it quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention. And in season 10, when she lures Alpha away from the Whisperers, and Negan kills her, it's Carol's planning, her patience, her willingness to wait and strike from the shadows that makes it work. Carol doesn't charge into fights. She doesn't announce herself. She just eliminates threats and disappears. And that stealth, that silence, it's survival. The pattern across the show is clear. Loud characters die. T-Dog, who was vocal and present, killed by walkers in season 3 after making noise. Bob Stookie, whose optimism and talking drew attention, bitten and killed in season 5. Abraham, loud and boisterous and using guns constantly, killed by Negan in season 7. The show punishes noise because noise attracts walkers. Every gunshot brings a horde. Every shout draws attention. And the survivors who last are the ones who've learned to kill quietly, with knives, with bows, with their hands. Daryl's crossbow is iconic for a reason. Michonne's katana is silent. Carol's knife work is deadly and quiet. They've all learned that in the apocalypse, the loudest person in the room is the first to die. But here's the emotional cost, and it's devastating. Carol's silence isn't just tactical, it's psychological. She's learned not to scream, not to cry out, not to make noise, even when she's terrified or grieving. In season 9, after Henry's death, after seeing his head on a pike, Carol doesn't wail. She doesn't rage. She goes quiet, cold, and she plans Alpha's murder methodically, silently, over months. And that suppression, that internalization of every emotion, it's part of why Carol isolates, why she leaves communities, why she struggles to connect. She's trained herself to be silent, and silence becomes who she is, not just in combat, but in everything. And the person she was in season 1, the woman who wanted to be seen and heard and protected, she's gone. Replaced by someone who survives by never being noticed until it's too late. Here's the question for you. Could you kill silently to protect the people you love? Could you bury every instinct to shout, to warn, to call for help, and instead just act, quietly, lethally, knowing that noise means death? It's not just about skill, It's about overcoming every social conditioning, every instinct that says make noise when you're in danger. Carol survived by becoming what she feared, a killer, silent and efficient. And the show's telling us that's the cost of survival. You become the thing that would have terrified the person you used to be. And Carol, looking in mirrors throughout the series, you can see she knows it. She's alive, yes, but she's not who she was. And maybe that's the trade. You survive by becoming someone else. And you hope that whoever's left when the silence ends is someone you can live with. Because Carol's still here, still standing. But she's also alone more often than not. And that loneliness, that isolation, it's not despite her survival skills. It's because of them. The third rule is the hardest one for humans to accept. Never stay anywhere permanently. Every static location in The Walking Dead falls eventually. Herschel's farm in Season 2, overrun by a herd and burned. The prison in Season 4, destroyed by the governor's attack. Terminus in Season 5, Carol burns it down. Even Alexandria, which survives longer than most, is attacked repeatedly by the wolves in Season 6, by the saviors in Seasons 7 and 8, by the whisperers in Seasons 9 and 10, and nearly falls during the Commonwealth conflict in Season 11. The pattern's undeniable. If you build walls and settle down, you become a target, and the communities that survive are either massive, like the Commonwealth or the CRM, or they adapt, move, and never get too comfortable. Rick's group survives Seasons 1 through 5 because they keep moving. The quarry camp, abandoned when it's attacked. The farm, fled when it's overrun. The prison, lived in for a year, but ultimately lost. The road to Terminus, walked in desperation. They don't put down roots. They survive by being mobile, adaptable, willing to leave everything behind. And when they finally settle in Alexandria in Season 5, the attacks start immediately. Season 6, the walls are breached. Season 7, the saviors take half their supplies. Season 9, the whisperers infiltrate and murder people during a fair. Alexandria's survival isn't because it's a perfect fortress. It's because Rick's group brought their mobility mentality with them. They're always ready to fight or flee, always preparing for the next threat, never assuming safety is permanent. But here's the emotional anchor, and it's Carl's line from Season 5, Episode 10, Them. The group's on the road, exhausted, starving, and Rick's talking about finding a new place to settle. And Carl, tired and wise beyond his years, says something like, "We are the walking dead." He's not talking about walkers. He's talking about the group. They're nomads, constantly moving and settling down, putting down roots. It's a luxury they can't afford. Home, in the apocalypse, is the most dangerous word because it implies permanence. And permanence is death. The counter-theory, though, is important. The Commonwealth survives, and it's stationary. The CRM's Civic Republic, 200,000 people, survives. So clearly, large, well-organized communities with massive resources can stay in one place. But those are exceptions, not the rule. They work because they're huge, because they have military power, because they can defend against threats. Smaller groups can't. For Rick's group, for Hilltop, for Oceanside, staying in one place makes them targets. Raiders see walls and assume supplies. Walkers accumulate around the noise and activity. And hostile groups, like the Saviors or the Whisperers, they find you, assess you, and either subjugate or destroy you. Mobility, for small groups, is survival. For large groups, it's logistics nightmares. So the rule adapts. If you're small, Keep moving. If you're large, be so large that threats think twice. The emotional weight is in what you lose when you can't have a home. Herschel's farm burning, Beth crying as they flee. That's loss. The prison, where they'd built cells into bedrooms, where Judith was born, destroyed and smoking, as Rick and Carl walk away. That's loss. And Carl, growing up on the road, never having a childhood home, never having stability, it shapes him into someone who understands survival, but struggles with hope. He wants to believe they can settle, can rebuild, but he's seen every attempt fail. And that tension between the human need for home and the apocalypse's demand for mobility, it's one of the show's central tragedies, because we're not built to be nomadic. We're built to nest, to put down roots, to create permanence. And The Walking Dead keeps showing us that in this world, permanence is a death sentence for the unprepared. Home is the most dangerous word in the apocalypse, because it makes you believe you can stop running. And the moment you stop, the moment you think you're safe, that's when the herd arrives. The raiders attack. The governor shows up with a tank, and you either flee or you die defending a place that was never really yours to keep. The fourth rule shifts from tactics to resources, and it's a lesson written in the fall of communities that looked strong but weren't. Water before walls. Always. In Season 3, Woodbury has walls, armed guards, and a functioning community. But we see hints of trouble. Their water supply is questionable. They're raiding for resources constantly, and the governor's hoarding medicine and supplies. By Season 4, after the governor's gone, Woodbury's abandoned, unsustainable, without his brutal resource management. Compare that to Terminus in Season 4 and 5, which has walls and traps and an organized system. But they've resorted to cannibalism because they couldn't sustain their population. They had defense. They didn't have resources. And that imbalance killed them, morally and literally, when Carol burned them out. The theory is simple. You can defend an empty fortress, but you'll die doing it. Alexandria, introduced in Season 5, survives because it was planned before the outbreak. It has solar panels. We see them on houses and buildings, a water tower, and access to natural resources. Deanna Monroe's husband was a city planner, and he designed Alexandria for sustainability. That foundation, that infrastructure, it's what allows Alexandria to survive multiple sieges. When the Saviors take half their supplies in Season 7, Alexandria doesn't collapse because they're producing food and water. When the Whisperers attack in Season 9, they rebuild because they have the resources to do so. Walls protect you from immediate threats, but resources keep you alive long term. Oceanside, the coastal community introduced in Season 7, survives through isolation and resource access. They're on the beach so they have fish, water through desalination, or nearby streams, and isolation from major walker populations. They don't have massive walls. They have camouflage, stealth, and the ocean. And that access to renewable resources, food from the sea, water from nature, it's what sustains them when other communities fall. The pattern's consistent. Communities with resources outlast communities with just weapons. The Sanctuary, Negan's industrial base in Seasons 7 and 8, it survives temporarily through extortion and tribute. But when Rick's coalition cuts off their supply lines, the Sanctuary nearly starves. They have walls, weapons, and organization, but without external resources, they're doomed. And by Season 9, the Sanctuary's abandoned because it was never sustainable on its own. Here's the emotional weight. Watching communities fall because they built wrong is heartbreaking. You see people working, trying, hoping that walls will keep them safe, that weapons will protect them. And it's not enough. In Season 4, the prison has walls and farmland, but they don't have clean water, and a waterborne virus kills dozens. In Season 6, Alexandria's nearly overrun, not because the walls fail, but because they didn't prepare for the psychological toll of siege, didn't stockpile enough, didn't plan for walker hordes. Communities fail because they prioritize feeling safe over being safe. Walls make you feel secure, but water, food, medicine, renewable resources, those keep you alive. And the survivors who understand this, who prioritize boring infrastructure over impressive defenses, they're the ones still standing. The show's pattern is brutal. If you build a fortress and fill it with weapons but neglect water and food, you'll either starve or become raiders. The saviors raided because the sanctuary couldn't sustain itself. Terminus turned to cannibalism for the same reason. And the communities that survive, Alexandria, Hilltop, which has farms and wells, Oceanside, which has the sea, they survive because they built resources first and defenses second. You can't shoot your way out of thirst. You can't guard yourself out of starvation. And the apocalypse doesn't care how thick your walls are if there's nothing behind them worth defending. So the rule is water before walls, food before fences, sustainability before security, because defense keeps you alive today. Resources keep you alive tomorrow. And in The Walking Dead, tomorrow's the real test. The communities that forget that, they're just burning time until the well runs dry. And desperation makes monsters of everyone inside. And when that happens, the walls you built to keep threats out become the prison that keeps you from escaping your own collapse. The fifth rule is about people, and it's one of the most important patterns in the show. The buddy system works. Pairs survive longer than solos or large groups. Morgan survived alone in Season 3, but he went insane. Merle survived alone in Season 3, and he died trying to take on the governor by himself. Indria tried to survive alone, and with the wrong people, and she died in Season 3. Jesus, a capable fighter and recruiter, died in Season 9 because he was caught alone by whisperers. Beta, the massive, terrifying whisperer lieutenant, died in Season 10 when he was finally isolated from his horde. The show's pattern is clear. Solo survivors either die or lose their minds. But pairs, partnerships built on trust and complementary skills, they endure. Let's look at the evidence. Rick and Daryl, from Season 1 through Season 9, they're partners. Rick's the strategist, the leader, the one who makes the big calls. Daryl's the tracker, the scout, the one who handles threats Rick doesn't see coming. And together, they survive situations that would kill either of them alone. In Season 5, when they're on the road to Terminus, Rick and Daryl work together constantly, Daryl tracking, Rick planning, both protecting the group. When Rick leaves in Season 9, Daryl doesn't die, but he isolates. And that isolation nearly breaks him. He needs a partner. He needs someone to balance his strengths and cover his weaknesses. Glenn and Maggie are another perfect example. From Season 2 through Glenn's death in Season 7, they're a unit. Glenn's resourceful and brave, but sometimes reckless. Maggie's grounded and strategic. Together, they balance each other, make better decisions, survive longer. And when Glenn dies, Maggie doesn't fall apart. She grieves, yes, but she uses the partnership they built, the lessons he taught her, the strength he gave her. And she leads Hilltop. Glenn's death breaks her heart, but their partnership's foundation keeps her going. That's the power of pairs. They don't just survive together. They create something that outlasts even death. Michonne and Rick, from season 6 onward, they're partners in leadership and life. Michonne's a warrior, independent, used to being alone. But with Rick, she finds someone who matches her strength, who trusts her judgment, who fights beside her rather than in front of or behind her. And when Rick's taken in season 9, Michonne's devastation is profound because she's lost her partner, her balance. She survives, leads Alexandria, raises Judith and RJ, but you can see the cost. She's half of a pair that's been split, and it takes years for her to leave and search for Rick, because leaving means accepting the partnership might be over. Here's the question for you. Who would you choose as your apocalypse partner? Not the strongest person, not the smartest, but the person whose weaknesses you can cover and whose strengths cover yours. The person you trust enough to sleep while they keep watch. The person who'll tell you when you're wrong and stand beside you when you're right. Because the pattern in The Walking Dead is that pairs work when they're balanced. Daryl and Carol, another example. They're partners in season 10 and beyond. Carol's strategic and ruthless. Daryl's loyal and protective. Together, they're formidable. Apart, they struggle. The emotional weight is in the cost of losing your partner. Glenn's death doesn't just kill Glenn. It wounds Maggie forever, shapes every choice she makes afterward. Rick's departure doesn't just remove Rick. It fractures Michonne, changes her leadership style, makes her more cautious and isolated. The buddy system works because two people can survive what one can't. But the cost is that when you lose your partner, you lose half of yourself. And learning to survive alone again, or finding a new partner, it's like learning to walk after losing a leg. You can do it, but it's never the same. And the survivors in The Walking Dead, who last the longest, who stay sane, who don't lose themselves, they're the ones who find and keep partners. Not because they're weak, but because they're smart enough to know survival isn't a solo sport. It's a relay, and you need someone to pass the baton to when you can't run anymore. The 6th rule is about adaptability, and it's written in the survival of characters like Eugene, Rosita, and Aaron. Cross-train your skills. Specialists die when their skill becomes obsolete. Herschel, the medic, was invaluable in season 2 and 3, but when the governor needed to make a statement in season 4, Herschel's medical skills didn't save him. He was killed because he was a symbol, a moral center, and his primary value, healing, couldn't protect him from brutality. Dale, the group's moral voice and RV mechanic, died in season 2 because his role became obsolete. The group didn't need a conscience when survival required harder choices. Tyrese, strong and intimidating, died in season 5 because muscle alone isn't enough. He was bitten because he hesitated, because he hadn't developed the ruthlessness the apocalypse demands. The theory is that survivors need multiple skills. Eugene's a perfect example. He's not a fighter when he's introduced in season 4. He's a liar, claiming to know a cure, using his intelligence and his mullet and his bullshit to stay protected. But over seasons, Eugene learns to fight, learns to manufacture bullets, learns chemistry and engineering, and by season 7 through 11, he's indispensable. Not because he's the best at any one thing, but because he's competent at many things. He can fight if needed, craft ammunition, solve logistical problems, and talk his way out of situations. That versatility keeps him alive when specialists die. Rosita's another example. Introduced in Season 4 as Abraham's partner, she's primarily a fighter. But over seasons, she learns medicine from the group's medics, learns mechanics, learns how to lead small units, and becomes one of Alexandria's key defenders. In Season 9, she's pregnant and still contributing because she's not just muscle. She's adaptable. She can fight, yes, but she can also plan, teach, heal. And that cross-training, that refusal to be defined by one skill, it's what keeps her alive through Season 11. She's not the best fighter. That's Daryl or Michonne. She's not the best medic. That's Sadiq or others. But she's good at multiple things, which makes her irreplaceable. Aaron, introduced in Season 5 as a recruiter, evolves into a fighter, a diplomat, a parent, and a community organizer. He loses his arm in Season 9, which could have made him obsolete in a world that values combat ability. But Aaron adapts. He learns to fight one-handed, becomes more strategic, focuses on leadership and community building. And he survives through Season 11 because he's not just one thing. He's whatever the community needs, and he's trained himself to fill multiple roles. The pattern is clear. Characters who define themselves by one skill die when that skill's not needed. Dale's moral speeches couldn't save him from a walker. Herschel's medical expertise couldn't protect him from the governor. Tyrese's strength couldn't save him from a bite. But characters who adapt, who learn new skills, who become generalists rather than specialists, they survive. Carol's the ultimate example. She's been a victim, a baker, a fighter, an infiltrator, a leader, a lone wolf. She's adapted to every situation, learned every skill she needed, and she survived 11 seasons because she's never just one thing. Here's the emotional weight. Adapting means losing parts of who you were. Carol's not the gentle mother from Season 1 anymore. Eugene's not the coward from Season 4. Rosita's not just Abraham's partner. They've changed, evolved, learned, and in doing so, they've left behind pieces of their identities. Herschel wanted to be a farmer and a healer. That's who he was. And refusing to become a killer, refusing to adapt beyond his skills. It's admirable, and it's fatal. The apocalypse rewards Renaissance people and punishes specialists because survival requires flexibility. You can't be just a medic when there's no medicine. You can't be just a fighter when stealth is required. You have to be everything, a little bit. And that constant evolution, that refusal to settle into one role, it's exhausting. But it's survival. And the characters who last are the ones who wake up every day and ask, what do I need to learn to stay alive tomorrow? And then they learn it, even when it costs them pieces of who they were, even when it means becoming someone they wouldn't recognize. The seventh rule is psychological, and it's the one that separates survivors from the walking dead. Find your why. In Season 8, Carl writes letters before he dies, and those letters give everyone in Rick's group a purpose beyond just not dying. For Rick, it's honoring Carl's vision of peace. For Michonne, it's protecting Carl's siblings. For Daryl, it's building the future Carl wanted. Those letters, simple and heartfelt, they're anchors. They give meaning, and meaning, in The Walking Dead, is what keeps you from giving up when giving up would be easier. Herschel's why was his farm and his faith. In Season 2, Herschel believed the walkers could be saved, that keeping them in the barn was mercy. And when Shane shattered that belief, when Herschel had to accept the dead were truly dead, he almost broke. But he found a new why: protecting his daughters, maintaining hope, farming even in the prison. That purpose, that commitment to growing things in a world of death, it kept Herschel human. And when the governor killed him in season 4, Herschel died still believing in that purpose. He wasn't broken. He was faithful to his why to the very end. Judith's why is Rick's legacy. She carries his gun, wears his hat, tries to lead like he did. She's too young to have known him well, but the stories she's heard, the idea of him, they give her purpose. In season 9, 10, and 11, Judith's constantly trying to live up to Rick, to be the person he'd want her to be. And that purpose, that connection to a father she barely remembers, it drives her decisions. She protects RJ, defends Alexandria, challenges adults when they're wrong. She's found her why in honoring someone she's constructed from absence and stories. And that's enough. The counterexamples are devastating. Andrea, in season 3, loses her why. She's trying to find a place, trying to broker peace between Rick and the governor, but she doesn't have a core purpose. She's reacting, adapting, trying to fit in, and it gets her killed. The governor manipulates her because she's searching for meaning, and he provides it, temporarily. Sasha, after losing both her brother Tyrese and her partner Bob, she finds her why in revenge, in destroying Negan. And that purpose, narrow and self-destructive, it leads her to a suicide mission in season 7. She turns herself into a walker bomb, and while it helps in the war, it also kills her. Her why was revenge, not survival. And the show punishes revenge as a purpose, because it's finite. Once you've gotten revenge, what's left? Tyrese dies in season 5 because he's lost his why. He's strong, he's moral, but he doesn't have a purpose beyond don't become a killer. And in the apocalypse, that's not enough. He's bitten while trying to protect Noah, and as he's dying, he hallucinates conversations with the people he's lost. And in those hallucinations, he's asking what the point was. What was it all for? And he doesn't have an answer. He's been surviving without meaning. And the exhaustion, the pointlessness, it's part of why he dies. He doesn't fight hard enough to stay, because he doesn't have a reason to. Here's the question for you. What would your why be in the apocalypse? Not survive. That's baseline. But what would give you purpose? What would make you get up in the morning when every day is dangerous and exhausting? Carl's why was building a better future. Herschel's was faith and farming. Rick's, initially, was finding his family, and then it became protecting them. What's yours? Because the pattern in The Walking Dead is brutal. Characters who lose their why die. Andrea, Tyrese, Sasha, even Shane in a way. He lost his purpose when Rick came back, and Laurie chose Rick. Shane's why was protecting Laurie and Carl, and when that was taken from him, he became destructive and died. But characters who have a why and hold on to it, they survive. Rick survives because of Carl. Daryl survives because of Carol, and later, because of the found family. Carol survives because, well, Carol's why changes. But she always has one, protecting Sophia, then the group, then herself, then Henry, then Daryl. She's adaptable in purpose, the same way she's adaptable in skills. And that's the key. Survival without purpose is slow death. You're just waiting. But survival with purpose, even if the purpose is small, even if it's just protect this one person, or grow this garden. It's what makes staying alive worth the cost. The eighth rule is about focus, and it's Maggie's leadership in seasons 9 through 11 that teaches it. Control what you can control. In season 9, after Rick's departure, Maggie's leading Hilltop, and she makes a choice that surprises some fans. She doesn't try to fix everything. The communities are fractured, the bridge projects failed, and tensions with the saviors are high. But Maggie focuses on Hilltop. She feeds her people, defends her borders, makes hard choices about Gregory and the saviors, and she doesn't overextend. When she eventually leaves in season 9 to join Georgie's group, Hilltop's stable because Maggie didn't try to save the world. She saved her community. And that focus, that refusal to take on more than she could handle, it's a survival skill leaders desperately need. The counterexample is Rick, and it's painful to watch. In seasons 7 and 8, during the war with the saviors, Rick's trying to unite Alexandria, Hilltop, the Kingdom, Oceanside, and the Scavengers. He's trying to save everyone, defeat Negan, rebuild civilization, and honor Glenn's memory all at once. And the weight of it breaks him. By season 8, Rick's making increasingly desperate decisions, trusting Jadis when he shouldn't, attacking the sanctuary, risking everything on bold moves. And in season 9, episode 5, Rick's final episode, he's blown up on a bridge, trying to save everyone one more time. His helicopter evacuation is literally him being removed from the story because he couldn't stop trying to save the world. And while Rick survives, as we learn in The Ones Who Live, his exit from the main show is a direct result of overextension, of trying to control and fix everything. Michonne, in seasons 9 and 10, makes a similar mistake. She isolates Alexandria, cuts off from other communities, tries to protect her people by controlling every variable, and it nearly destroys her. She becomes paranoid, exhausted, unable to trust. And when she finally leaves in season 10 to search for Rick, it's partly because the weight of trying to control everything has become unbearable. She's learned the same lesson Rick learned too late. You can't save everyone, and trying to will kill you, or break you, or both. Deanna Monroe, Alexandria's original leader in season 5 and 6, she dies because she overextends. She's trying to maintain pre-outbreak civilization, follow laws and procedures, accommodate everyone. And when the walls are breached in season 6, when walkers flood Alexandria, Deanna's killed because she wasn't focused on the immediate threat. She was trying to preserve a world that doesn't exist anymore, trying to control the uncontrollable, and it costs her life. The theory here is simple, but hard to practice. In the apocalypse, you can't fix everything. You can't save everyone. You can only control what's directly in front of you. Maggie understands this. She leads Hilltop, makes hard calls, and when situations are beyond her control, like the Whisperers or the Commonwealth, she adapts but doesn't try to solve everything. She protects her people, and that's enough. That focus, that acceptance of limits, it's what keeps her sane and alive through season 11. The emotional weight is in what you lose by focusing. When Maggie chooses Hilltop, she's choosing not to help Alexandria in every crisis. When Rick tries to help everyone, he loses time with Judith and Carl. When Michonne isolates Alexandria, she's choosing safety over connection. Every choice to control something means accepting you can't control something else. And that's agonizing, because these are good people who want to help, who want to save everyone. But the apocalypse doesn't care about good intentions. It cares about sustainable effort, and leaders who try to do everything burn out, break down, or die. The ones who survive are the ones who accept their limits, focus on what they can actually change, and let the rest go. Here's the question. What would you choose? If you had to lead, would you try to save everyone and risk burning out? Or would you focus on your community and accept that people beyond your reach might die? There's no right answer, but the show's pattern is clear. Leaders who overextend break. Rick left. Michonne nearly broke. Deanna died. But Maggie, by focusing on what she could control, survived and kept Hilltop alive. And maybe that's the lesson. You can't save the world. You can save your people. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Even when it feels like giving up. Even when you know people are suffering that you could maybe help. You have to draw a line, focus on what's inside it, and protect that with everything you have. Because if you don't, you'll collapse trying to hold up the world, and then you won't be able to protect anyone, not even yourself. The 9th rule is about grief, and it's one of the most brutal lessons The Walking Dead teaches. Grieve fast, grieve hard, then move on. In Season 9, after Rick's departure, Daryl isolates himself. He goes into the woods, lives alone, searches for Rick's body for years. And that prolonged grief, that inability to process and continue, it nearly destroys him. When Carol finds him in Season 10, Daryl's barely functional. He's alive, but he's not living. Compare that to Maggie after Glenn's death in Season 7. Maggie grieves. We see her devastation, her rage, her tears. But she doesn't stop. She leads Hilltop, protects her unborn child, plans for the future. Her grief is deep and real, but it's functional. She doesn't let it consume her because she can't afford to. And that difference between grief that ends and grief that doesn't, it's often the difference between survival and death. The pattern across the show is consistent. Characters who suppress grief entirely break eventually. Carol, after Sophia's death in Season 2, tries to keep moving, to stay strong. But you can see it building. By Season 4 and 5, she's making increasingly ruthless choices. And there's a coldness to her that wasn't there before. She's suppressed her grief, turned it into anger and efficiency. And while it keeps her alive, it isolates her. In Season 6, she finally breaks, leaves Alexandria, and lives alone because the weight of everything she's suppressed has become unbearable. Carol's grief doesn't kill her, but it costs her years of connection, of community, of being present with people she loves. Sasha, after losing both her brother Tyrese in Season 5 and her partner Bob before that, she tries to function through grief. But in Season 7, it breaks her. She becomes reckless, takes risks, and eventually goes on a suicide mission against Negan. She turns herself into a walker bomb, sacrifices herself, and while it's framed as heroic, it's also the end result of grief she couldn't process. She lost everyone who mattered, and survival without them felt pointless. And the show lets her die. Not just because the plot needed it, but because her grief had calcified into something that made continued survival unbearable. Morgan's breakdown in Season 3 is the ultimate example of grief that doesn't end. After his son, Dwayne, is killed, we learn this in Clear. Morgan loses his mind. He sets traps, writes on walls, sees threats everywhere. He's alive, but he's not Morgan anymore. He's a shell, driven by guilt and grief and the inability to move past what he lost. And when Rick finds him in Season 3, Episode 12, Morgan's barely human. He survived physically, but psychologically, he died with Dwayne. And it takes years, through season 5, 6, 7, and 8, for Morgan to process that grief, to become functional again. And even then, he's changed. He adopts all life is precious in season 6, then swings back to clear in season 8. His grief broke him, and he's still trying to find balance. The theory is that grief in the apocalypse must be time-limited, not suppressed, not denied, but processed quickly and then set aside. Because if you stay in grief, if you can't move past it, you die. Either literally, like Sasha, or functionally, like Daryl in season 9, or Morgan in season 3. The survivors who last are the ones who grieve hard, crying, raging, feeling everything, and then get up the next day and keep going. Maggie does this. Rick does this after Laurie and Carl. Carol does this. Though it costs her. They feel their losses, acknowledge them, and then choose to continue because the people still alive need them. Here's the question for you. How long can you afford to grieve in the apocalypse? Days? Weeks? Months? There's no timer, no rule, but the pattern's clear. If you grieve too long, you die or go insane. If you don't grieve at all, you break eventually. The balance is brutal and unfair. You have to feel everything, process the loss, and then force yourself to keep going, even when keeping going feels impossible. And that's why so many characters in The Walking Dead struggle, because they're human, and humans need time to heal. And the apocalypse doesn't give you time. It just keeps moving, keeps threatening, keeps demanding you act even when you're shattered. And the survivors are the ones who somehow manage to hold both truths. I'm devastated, and I have to keep going. Not because they're strong necessarily, but because stopping means dying. And they're not ready to die. Not yet. So they grieve, fast and hard, and then they stand up and they move. And the weight of everyone they've lost, it goes with them. Forever. The 10th rule is about loyalty, and it's a hard truth. Know when to leave. In season 8, Morgan leaves Alexandria for Fear the Walking Dead, crosses the country alone, and finds a new community. Dwight, after the war with the Saviors, leaves to find Sherry, eventually ending up in Fear as well. Anne, Jadis, leaves with the CRM helicopter in season 9, abandoning the communities entirely. And the pattern here is that sometimes staying in a community that's become toxic or that no longer serves you, it's not loyalty, it's suicide. Knowing when a place or a group has become dangerous to your survival or your sanity, and having the courage to leave, that's a survival skill as important as any weapon. The counterexamples are tragic. Saviors who stayed loyal to Negan after the war, after it was clear his leadership was destructive. Many of them died in the conflicts that followed. Some were hanged by Maggie. Some killed in skirmishes. Some died when the sanctuary fell apart. Their loyalty to Negan, to the idea of the Saviors, it cost them their lives. They should have left, integrated into Alexandria or Hilltop, started over. But loyalty, misplaced and stubborn, kept them tied to a sinking ship. Oceanside's another example. They stayed isolated for years, hiding from the Saviors, refusing to join Rick's coalition initially. And that isolation kept them safe in some ways, but also kept them weak. They missed opportunities for trade, for alliances, for growth. When they finally did join the fight in season 8, it was almost too late. Their loyalty to isolation, to their own safety above all else, it nearly made them irrelevant. They survived, yes, but barely, and only by eventually leaving their isolation and connecting with other communities. Daryl, in Season 10, almost leaves. After Rick's departure, after the Whisperers, after everything, Daryl's on the edge of just walking away into the woods and never coming back. Carol sees it, pulls him back, reminds him why he stays. But the fact that Daryl, the most loyal character in the show, considers leaving, it shows how important it is to know your limits. He stays, ultimately, but only because he finds new purpose. Protecting Judith and RJ, building the future. If he hadn't found that purpose, leaving would have been the healthier choice, because staying in a place that's draining you, that's asking more than you can give, it'll kill you slowly. Better to leave and survive than stay and break. The emotional weight is in what leaving costs. When Morgan leaves, he's abandoning people he's fought beside for years. When Dwight leaves, he's giving up on redemption within the communities, choosing personal purpose over communal obligation. When Anne leaves, she's betraying everyone, but she's also saving herself from a life that was destroying her. And those choices, to prioritize self over community, they're framed as morally complex. The show doesn't say leaving is right or wrong. It just shows that sometimes it's necessary. The theory is that loyalty is a virtue until it becomes suicide. Staying with people who don't respect you, who take advantage, who drain your resources and give nothing back, that's not loyalty. That's martyrdom. And martyrs don't survive. The characters who last in The Walking Dead are the ones who can assess when a community's become toxic, when leadership's failed, when staying means dying, and they leave. They don't do it lightly. They grieve the loss of connection, but they do it because survival sometimes means walking away from people you love to protect yourself. And that's one of the hardest lessons the show teaches. Here's the question: could you leave? If the group you were with became dangerous or toxic, if staying meant sacrificing your sanity or your life, could you walk away from people you fought beside, bled with, loved? Or would loyalty keep you there until it was too late? Because the pattern's clear. The survivors who can leave when necessary, they survive. The ones who can't, who stay out of guilt or obligation or hope things will change, they often die. Or worse, they become part of the toxicity, enablers of the dysfunction, stuck in a cycle they can't break because they've invested too much to walk away. And watching that happen, watching characters stay too long, it's heartbreaking. Because you want to tell them, leave, just leave. You deserve better. But they don't listen. They stay. And sometimes they survive anyway. But often, they don't. And their loyalty, their dedication, it becomes the epitaph on their grave. They stayed. And it killed them. The 11th rule is about recognizing traps. And The Walking Dead is full of them. If a place looks too safe, it's a trap. Terminus, Grady Memorial Hospital, the Sanctuary, every location that promises safety, that advertises itself as a haven, turns out to be a nightmare. The pattern's so consistent, it becomes almost a joke among fans. But it's based on a brutal truth. Real safety doesn't advertise itself. Communities that are actually safe don't need to lure people in. They're cautious, selective, sometimes even hostile to strangers because they're protecting something real. Terminus is the clearest example. In Season 4, the group sees signs everywhere. Terminus, sanctuary for all. It's advertised on trees, buildings, train tracks, and it seems perfect. A community, welcoming everyone, promising safety. But when Rick's group arrives in Season 4's finale and Season 5's premiere, it's a trap. Terminus is run by cannibals, people who were once victims themselves but who've turned into monsters. They process newcomers like cattle, literally. And the people who believed the signs, who walked into Terminus hoping for safety, they're hanging in that smokehouse as meat. The signs weren't an invitation, they were bait. Grady Memorial Hospital in Season 5 seems safer. It's led by police officers. There's structure, rules, a hierarchy. But it's forced labor, a system where people are enslaved through debt. Beth discovers this, tries to resist, and is killed by Officer Dawn in Season 5, Episode 8. Grady presented itself as order, as civilization, but it was a prison. And the people who stayed, who believed in the system, they were trapped. The ones who tried to leave were hunted. Real safety doesn't require you to stay. It lets you go. The Sanctuary, Negan's base in Season 7 and 8, it's another trap disguised as community. Negan offers protection. Join us, follow the rules, and you'll be safe. But the cost is submission, tribute, loss of autonomy. The Sanctuary's workers, the people on the lower levels, they're essentially slaves. And the saviors, Negan's soldiers, they're complicit in maintaining that system. The Sanctuary advertises strength and safety, but it's built on exploitation. And when it falls in Season 8 and is eventually abandoned by Season 9, it's because the foundation was rotten. You can't build real safety on oppression. The theory is simple. Real safety is never advertised. Alexandria doesn't have signs. Rick's group finds it through Aaron, a recruiter who carefully vets people before bringing them in. The kingdom doesn't advertise. Ezekiel builds relationships with Hilltop and Alexandria through trade and trust. Oceanside doesn't advertise. They hide deliberately. The communities that survive long-term are the ones that are selective, cautious, and don't promise paradise, because they know paradise doesn't exist in the apocalypse, only varying degrees of survival. The emotional weight is in the hope that gets weaponized. Bob, seeing the Terminus signs in Season 4, he's excited. He believes they've found safety. And that hope, that desperate need to believe there's a place where they can rest, it walks him right into a trap. Beth, at Grady, she tries to make the best of it, tries to believe Dawn's system can be reformed, and that hope gets her killed. Daryl, watching Beth die, he's learned the lesson that hope is dangerous when it's not paired with suspicion. The survivors who last are the ones who approach every offer of safety with skepticism, who look for the catch, who assume the worst until proven otherwise. The pattern across 11 seasons is, be suspicious of offers that seem too good. Question why a community needs to advertise. Ask what they're not telling you. Because in The Walking Dead, the places that look safest are usually the most dangerous. They've learned to mimic safety, to use the language of community and protection, but underneath, they're predatory. And the survivors who recognize that, who can walk past the sanctuary for all signs and keep moving, they're the ones who avoid becoming someone else's meal. Real safety is quiet, selective, hard-earned. It doesn't promise. It just exists, behind walls built by people who've learned that advertising safety attracts the desperate. And the desperate are easy to exploit. The 12th rule is about noise, and it's the most consistently enforced rule in the entire show. The apocalypse belongs to the quiet. In Season 1, at the quarry, Shane tells everyone to keep noise down because it attracts walkers. In Season 2, the barn full of walkers is agitated by sound. In Season 6, Alexandria's walls are breached partly because of noise from the wolves' attack and the walkers it attracted. In Season 9, Rick's final episode, he's on that bridge, and the herd chasing him was attracted by noise. Fighting, explosions, shouting. Every major disaster in The Walking Dead is preceded or caused by noise. Gunshots, explosions, yelling, vehicles running. Noise attracts hordes, and hordes kill. The theory is brutal but simple. Survivors die from their own noise more than from direct walker encounters. Glenn's death in Season 7, Episode 1, while directly caused by Negan, was partly triggered by Daryl punching Negan in a moment of rage. That outburst, that inability to stay quiet and still, it caused Negan to kill Glenn as punishment. Daryl's noise, his emotional reaction, it had consequences that killed someone he loved. And that guilt, that knowledge that his action caused Glenn's death, Daryl carries it for the rest of the series. Alexandria's breach in Season 6 starts with the wolves' attack, but it escalates because of noise. The church tower falls, partly due to structural damage, but accelerated by chaos and noise, and the sound attracts a massive herd that fills Alexandria's streets. Rick and the group survive by covering themselves in walker guts and moving silently through the horde. Every time someone makes noise, Sam calling for his mom, Ron's struggle with Carl, it threatens everyone. And when they finally fight back, when they start killing walkers with weapons, the noise attracts more. It's a cycle. Noise brings walkers. Fighting makes noise. More walkers come. The only way to break the cycle is silence or escape. Rick's sacrifice on the bridge in Season 9, Episode 5. It's the ultimate example of noise as danger. The herd chasing Rick is massive, drawn by the sounds of conflict between communities, by gunfire, by chaos. Rick leads them onto the bridge, and when he blows it up, he's eliminating the noise and the horde at once, but it nearly kills him. He survives only because Anne happens to be nearby with a CRM helicopter, and the cost of that noise, that confrontation, it's Rick's removal from his family, his community, his life. Noise literally separates Rick from everything he loves. The emotional weight is in the self-control required. Could you stay silent watching your loved ones threatened? Could you resist screaming when you're terrified? Could you kill walkers with knives instead of guns, knowing knives are slower, more dangerous, more intimate? The survivors who last are the ones who've mastered silence. Daryl with his crossbow, Michonne with her katana, Carol with her knives. They don't make noise unless absolutely necessary. They've trained themselves to fight quietly, to move without sound, to communicate with gestures and looks instead of words. And the ones who don't learn this, they die. Abraham, in Season 7, he's killed partly because he's loud, visible, defiant. He stands up to Negan, makes himself a target. And while his death is noble in its defiance, it's also the result of refusing to be quiet, to submit, to make himself small. Abraham dies as he lived, loud, brave, and unwilling to hide. And that's admirable, but it's also fatal. The pattern is, gunfire attracts hordes, explosions attract hordes, shouting, fighting, vehicles, construction, anything louder than a whisper. It brings walkers, and walkers bring death. The survivors who understand this, who prioritize stealth, who've learned to communicate silently and kill quietly, they're the ones who survive hordes that kill everyone else. The apocalypse doesn't belong to the strong or the brave. It belongs to the quiet, the ones who can stand in a herd, covered in guts, and not make a sound even when every instinct is screaming to run. to fight, to cry out. Silence is survival. Noise is death. And every gunshot, every explosion, every shout, it's a countdown timer to the moment the horde arrives. The 13th and final rule is about balance, and it's the hardest lesson The Walking Dead teaches. Hope without realism kills you. Pure pragmatism kills you too. You need both. Herschel's hope in Season 2, his belief that the walkers in his barn could be saved, it nearly gets everyone killed. When Shane opens that barn and the walkers pour out, Sophia's among them, and Herschel's belief is shattered. Hope without realism is denial, and denial in the apocalypse is fatal. Dale's idealism in Season 2, his belief that the group should spare Randall, that they should maintain moral standards, it's admirable, but it also isolates him. And when Dale dies in Season 2, killed by a walker in a field, part of the tragedy is that his idealism, his hope for humanity, didn't protect him. He died believing in a world that didn't exist anymore. But pure pragmatism is just as deadly. Shane, in Season 2, he's the ultimate pragmatist. Kill threats. Make hard choices. Survival over morality. And it destroys him. By Season 2's finale, Shane's so consumed by pragmatism, by doing what's necessary, that he tries to kill Rick. And Rick kills him first. Shane's pragmatism, untempered by hope or humanity, turned him into the thing they were fighting against. He became a threat, and threats get eliminated. The governor in Seasons 3 and 4, same pattern. Pure pragmatism, pure survival at any cost. It turns you into a monster, and monsters, eventually, get killed. Carl's letters in Season 8 are the show's thesis on this balance. Carl's dying from a walker bite, and he writes to everyone telling them to build a better world. Not just survive, but build something worth surviving for. He writes to Rick, telling him to make peace with Negan, to end the cycle of violence, to choose hope. And he writes to Negan, telling him he can change, that it's not too late. Carl's letters are hopeful, but they're also grounded. He's not saying ignore threats or abandon pragmatism. He's saying use pragmatism to protect hope, not replace it. Fight when you have to, but build when you can. Kill when necessary, but don't become killers. It's balance, and it's hard, and it's the only way to survive without losing yourself. Rick's arc proves this. In Season 1 and 2, Rick's too hopeful, too idealistic. He wants to save everyone, believes in laws and rules that don't apply anymore, and people die because of it. By Season 3 and 4, Rick swings toward pragmatism. He becomes harder, makes brutal choices, becomes dictator Rick. And it works, but it costs him. Herschel has to remind him in Season 4 that he's losing himself, that he's becoming like the governor. Rick finds balance in Seasons 5 through 8. He's strategic and ruthless when needed, but he's also building, farming, teaching Carl, maintaining hope. And when Carl dies and leaves those letters, Rick honors them by ending the war with Negan, by choosing to build instead of destroy. The theory is that the Walking Dead's survivors who last are the ones who blend hope and realism. Maggie leads Hilltop with hope, farming, community, growth. But she's also realistic, executes Gregory, fights the saviors, makes hard calls. Daryl's loyal and protective, hope, but also strategic and brutal when necessary, realism. Carol oscillates between hope and pragmatism, sometimes losing balance, but she always comes back to center eventually. The characters who die are the ones who can't balance. Too much hope. Dale, Herschel, eventually. Beth. Too much pragmatism. Shane, the governor, Beta. Here's the final question. Is hope worth dying for? Or is survival enough? And the answer The Walking Dead gives after 11 seasons is hope's worth dying for if it means something, if it builds something, if it creates a future worth living in. But hope without action, without pragmatism, without the willingness to defend it, it's just fantasy. And pragmatism without hope, without something beyond survival, it's just existence. It's being the walking dead, alive, but not living. The survivors who last are the ones who can hold both truths. The world is brutal, and you have to fight to survive. And the world is worth fighting for, because there's still beauty, love, connection. Both are true. And living in that tension, that balance, it's exhausting. But it's survival. Not just breathing, living. And maybe that's the real lesson. Survival is staying alive. But living is finding something worth staying alive for. And in The Walking Dead, that's the difference between Morgan in Clear, with his walls and traps, alive but insane, and Rick carrying Carl's letters, surviving and building and hoping. Both survived, but only one was living. And that balance, that choice to hope while being realistic about threats, is what makes the difference. We're back in Morgan's apartment now, the one from Clear, and those keys are everywhere, hanging on walls, scattered on tables, looped on strings. And after tracing 13 rules of survival, after understanding what it takes to stay alive in The Walking Dead, those keys mean something different. They're not just tools, they're choices. Keys to survival. Yes, knowing when to run, when to fight, when to stay silent. Keys to sanity. Finding your why, grieving and moving on, knowing when to leave. Keys to community, the buddy system, cross-training skills, controlling what you can control. Every key represents a door you can open or keep closed, a choice about who to be, how to survive, what to sacrifice. Morgan kept all the keys. Every building he cleared, every car he abandoned, every door he locked or unlocked, he kept the key. And that's part of why he went insane. He was trying to control everything, to keep all the options, to maintain systems that no longer mattered. The keys became obsessions instead of tools. He couldn't let them go, couldn't prioritize, couldn't accept that some doors should stay closed and some keys should be abandoned. He survived, yes, longer than almost anyone alone. But at what cost? He lost Dwayne. He lost his mind. He lost who he was. And when Rick found him in season 3, Morgan was alive but empty, a shell holding keys to nothing that mattered. The question we started with was, what's the real cost of surviving? And the answer, traced through 11 seasons, is that survival requires constant choice. Every rule we've explored, it has a cost. Running costs dignity. Silence costs connection. Leaving costs loyalty. Hope costs safety. Pragmatism costs humanity. You can't have it all. You can't keep all the keys. You have to choose which doors to open and which to keep closed, which rules to follow and which to break, which parts of yourself to keep and which to sacrifice. And that choosing, that constant evaluation of what matters most, it's what separates survivors who live from survivors who merely exist. Rick's keys were different from Morgan's. Rick kept the keys to family, protecting Laurie, Carl, Judith, Michonne. He kept the keys to community, building Alexandria, leading, and he let go of keys to safety, risking himself repeatedly, to rest, never stopping, to a normal life, accepting he'd always be fighting. Rick chose what to keep and what to sacrifice. And he lived, not just survived, until the bridge took him. And even then, even separated from his family. He's still Rick. He's still trying to build something, still hoping. The keys he chose to keep, they defined him, and the ones he let go, they freed him to focus on what mattered. The survivors in The Walking Dead, the ones who last and stay human, they're the ones who figure out their keys. Carol's keys are survival and protection. Daryl's are loyalty and found family. Maggie's are leadership and legacy. They've chosen, consciously or not, which doors to open, and they've accepted the cost of the doors they've left closed. Carol's closed the door to softness, to being vulnerable. Daryl's closed the door to leading, to being the face of decisions. Maggie's closed the door to peace with Negan, to forgiveness. And those closed doors, they're losses, real losses. But they're also focus. By choosing what matters, by letting go of what doesn't, they've survived without going mad. The image I leave you with is simple. Keys scattered on a table. Some rusted, unused, representing rules you rejected. Some bloody, overused, representing rules you followed too hard. And some shining, balanced, representing the rules you found your way to integrate. Survival in The Walking Dead isn't about following every rule. It's about knowing which rules apply to you, which doors you need to open, which keys you need to keep, and having the wisdom to know that the keys that work for Rick might not work for Carol. The doors Morgan needed to open aren't the doors Daryl should open. Survival is personal. It's about figuring out who you are in the apocalypse and making choices that keep you alive without destroying who you are. And that balance, that wisdom, it's not given, it's earned. Through loss, through mistakes, through watching others die and learning from their keys, their doors, their choices. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we can ask. Not perfect survival, just conscious survival. Choosing your keys, opening your doors, and accepting the cost of the ones you leave closed. Because in The Walking Dead, survival is possible, but it's never free. And the price is paid in the parts of yourself you sacrifice to stay alive. The only question is, which parts can you afford to lose? And which parts, no matter what, you'll fight to keep?